Last week when I found out that I would be preaching this Sunday, I told my dad about it, and he says, "Oh, we're going to have to be there." He says, "We can never miss seeing our favorite preacher sitting in the front row watching me speak." So that was a real quote. He was planning to be here, but they got sick, so in memory of him. So today we're talking about memory. Memory, what do we remember? What do we forget? What, kind of God remembers and God forgets, because it's an important concept. So to do this, we're going to have to go all the way back to the beginning of the Old Testament. We're going to take a look at Leviticus. And this is where God is creating covenants with the nation of Israel. Ron talked a couple weeks ago about covenants and how God was saying, I'm going to do all these things for you guys, and you guys are going to serve me. You guys are going to be my people. So let's take a look at what, those different aspects of that covenant were. So in Leviticus chapter 26, starting in verse 3, it says, "If you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, I will send you rain in its season. The ground will yield its crops, and the trees their fruit. Your threshing will continue until grape harvest, and the grape harvest will continue until planting. And you will eat all the food you want and live in safety in your land." Already, this sounds awesome. I mean, you're planting, everything is going to be, growing. That's, the Central California dream here. "I will grant you peace in the land, and you will lie down, and no one will make you afraid. I will remove wild beasts from the land, and the sword will not pass through your country. You will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall by the sword before you. I will look on you with favor and make you fruitful, increase your numbers, and I will keep my covenant with you. You will still be eating last year's harvest when you will have to move it out to make room for the new." So you're going to have so much food that you're just going to have to keep on cycling it through. You won't even have room to store it, basically. "I will put my dwelling place among you and will not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. For I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to walk with heads held high." Just think of that. That's an awesome promise there. I mean, fruitful crops, peace in the land, that whoever you go against or whoever goes against you, they're going to run, even if you're outnumbered. That God's going to multiply you, make sure that you have enough that everything is overflowing. I mean, this sounds awesome. I mean, God gave some pretty awesome promises there. And God knew that we as humans were forgetful. That even though God has done all these things and God has promised all these things, that the Israelites and us in general are forgetful people. I mean, I misplaced my sermon notes 3 times this morning since I got here. Not just this, let's not count the time since I wrote them. We're forgetful people. And so God, several times in the Bible, this is just one instance, but several times in the Bible, he says, "Be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." Now, I couldn't even count because there were so many instances of God saying, make sure you don't forget, make sure you don't forget, make sure you don't forget. It's kind of like, when your wife sends you the text, "Don't forget to pick up the milk at the store. Don't forget to pick up the milk at the store. Don't forget. Where's the milk?" We forget. And just like we forget, they forgot. So he brought them out of Egypt. He brought them out of slavery. He parted the Red Sea. He made the bitter water sweet so that they could drink it. And he literally made it rain food from the sky for them. So this is pretty awesome. I mean, there's so many different things here to remember. So you think that they're going to remember God in uncertain times, right? You would think that. You think, well, surely I would. So let's see what happens when they're kind of faced with some trials and temptations here in Exodus. In Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, it says, when the people saw that Moses was so long, already you're thinking, oh no. In coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. And I looked it up. It had been 40 days. He went up there a little over a month. So you think, they're coming to Aaron. Aaron's this number 2 guy, Aaron, for sure. Aaron's going to say something smart. Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. Aaron, why? You had one job. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Now, I'm already thinking, that's a cow. God was literally this big fireball, this cloud in the sky, this pillar cloud. That's God obviously working. If I took a chisel and I started chiseling out a cow, I would not even hold that up before you and say, this is your God. Nope. God was awesome. But after that, and Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. They were committing these awful sins, and I'm not going to get into the word revelry, but that's those following in sexual sins. Then the Lord said to Moses, go down, because your people, it kind of reminds me of when the kid's being bad and the wife says, that's your son, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. This is sad. This is a sad thing. Look at, I can almost just hear God's sadness in this. They have been quick to turn away from what I've commanded. It took 40 days. It took 40 days from the point that I brought them out here and I'm giving you these instructions. They haven't even gotten all the instructions yet, and already they're forgetting. Already they're going back to their past. It kind of thinks, what kind of memory is that? That so quickly you can go from remembering the Red Sea, which literally was parted. I mean, that's something that kind of sticks in your mind. That food is coming from the sky, that bitter water, you taste water and it's horrible, and God fixes it and makes it sweet water. These are things that would kind of stick in your mind, but they forget. Because we forget. We're humans. Our memory span is short. It's short. So God remembers, but we forget. But God remembers. God remembers his covenant. And after this, God wanted to destroy the Israelites, but Moses reminded him of his covenant, his promise. And God keeps his promise. Even when we forget, even when we mess up on our end of it, God is still faithful in that. But when we look in the entirety of the Bible, we see over and over again God making promises, God telling us to do things, to not do things, and repeatedly we mess up. Look at Adam and Eve. You can do literally anything. You can eat literally anything, just not that one tree. Picture your kid taking him in a candy store. You can eat any candy in here, just not that one Twix bar. Twix, forbidden. But, they messed up. They forgot, and you can tell that they forgot all the things that God had done for them, because if they remembered in that moment, they wouldn't have done it. if they remembered, God has done all this. God has given us literally everything here. God is, in communion with us. But they didn't think of that. They thought of their own selfish desires in that moment. We look at the book of Judges, right? I mean, almost every single chapter starts with, and again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. It's almost like this repetition that just over and over again, they mess up, they forget. They don't remember what God commanded. They don't remember what God wanted, and they failed. Another example is Hosea. Now, this is another time when the Israelites messed up and they failed. When God created that covenant with Israel, it was kind of like a marriage. It's kind of compared to a marriage. So you got this prophet, Hosea, and God wants him to marry this prostitute, Gomer. And she is unfaithful to him. And in that same way, it was this picture, this picture of God's covenant, that God took the prostitute Israel and entered in this covenant with them. But they fell away. They started worshiping other gods. They started worshiping Baal. And when I was doing a study of Hosea, it was talking about how throughout the week they would do, worshiping Baal. They would do these horrible things. They would indulge themselves in all these fleshly desires and sins. And then on the day when they went to the temple, they would praise God like nothing ever happened. And that's not right. It's this relationship that God wants with us, but that we keep breaking off, that the Israelites broke off, and that we continue to break off, and it's not right. So, looking at all those Old Testament situations, how does that apply to us? Do we remember what God has done in our lives? Like I already said, I'm a person of short memory. I always like what Winnie the Pooh says. I'm a bear of very small brain. That's how I feel sometimes. That my memory is so short. That I was thinking, in preparing for this lesson, what has God done for me? How has God blessed me? And do I remember that? Do I think about that? Or do we have the mentality of, what has God done for me lately? Just think about that. What has God done for me lately? Because our memories are so short. We say, where is God? I'm in this trouble. Where is God? Where is he working? What has God done for me lately? And we forget all those other times. Just like the Israelites. That God over and over again answered the prayers, answered, their cries, gave them everything they were needing. But as soon as trials came, as soon as it took 40 days for somebody to come down from the mountain, they fell away. So what about us? In all the good times that God has blessed us over and over again, healing. I was thinking when we were younger, my brother, when he was born, he had a heart murmur. And they were really afraid, that this was going to develop into something really bad. That they could hear something in there and they weren't sure what it was. But, we prayed and it completely disappeared. And they were like, this doesn't usually happen. Usually this is, a very serious thing, but it completely disappeared. And I was thinking, when was the last time I thought about that? That I'm thinking, where is God in my life today? God's always been there. He's always been faithful. He's always kept his promises. Good through the bad. But in thinking about this, in thinking about my brother, I haven't thought about that instance in years. I hadn't thought about what God did for us then, for our family then, in a long time. Because we're people of very short memory. It happens. We're so thankful to God for a week. We're thankful to God for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Maybe sometimes we thank him for it. Now, 11 years later? Don't really think about it. But over and over again, God proves himself. God proves himself to the Israelites. God proves himself to us through all the blessings that he has given us. We have to remember. We have to remember. So, do any of you guys know what a tipper bird is? It's one of those, it's a plastic bird, and you put it next to a cup of water, and the bird's head dips into the water, and when the bird's head dips into the water, some other mechanisms back here that absorb the water make it tilt back up, and then slowly as the water evaporates off of the top of the bird, it tips back into the water. And I don't know if any of you guys know what that is. Yeah, okay, good. Somebody does. But so this tipper bird is kind of an idea of how we react. That we're weighed down, that our natural position is just to tilt down, that we're weighed down under life's problems. But then we touch that water, we remember what God has done for us. We remember his grace, and that puts us back up. And we're up, and everything's great. But then the trials keep coming, and the weight keeps pushing us down, and we forget again, and we're down. And it's just this picture of over and over again that our memories are so short that we just, we're up and happy, but then we pop right back down again as soon as another trial comes. We have to remember. We have to remember. When we forget God, everything will weigh us down. We're more likely to fall into temptation. Just everything feels wrong. Because God remembers us. We have to remember God. We talked the last time I spoke about seeking God's face, about keeping our eyes on him. This is very much connected in that we have to remember. Because forgetting is something that happens. But remembering is something that you have to work towards. That you can't just, you don't just normally remember. It's something that you kind of have to put into action. So what do? How do we remember? How do we help ourselves remember? Well, there's a couple different instances in the Bible, I think, where people put things in place, or God put things in place to help remind us. So we're going to take a look at one of those in Joshua chapter 3. Now, in this, they're marching in through the promised land. It's kind of a scary place. Apparently there's large people. Apparently, there's a lot of people who were going to move in here and we're going to kick them out, basically. That's the point of going through the promised land here. But they're approaching the River Jordan. And the River Jordan in this time of the year is this raging current. It kind of reminds me of the river near our house. When the snow all starts melting in the spring, that thing's rushing. You don't want to jump in there. You'll get carried away. But let's take a look at Joshua chapter 3. It says, "Now then," and this is God talking here, "Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. As soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." Now just think about that too. Just this mental image. The water standing in a heap. That's just really cool. That's a cool description to me. Sorry. But so when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan. While the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off, so that the people crossed over opposite Jericho. It's this mind-blowing thing, that God made the water stop in a heap. Crazy, right? And I'm kind of thinking that God is thinking, well, I already did this before. I already did this before when they came out of Egypt and they forgot. So what can we do here to set up this reminder of what has been done here today, what God has done. So the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground while all Israel passed by until the entire nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. Then, in chapter 4, it says, the whole nation had finished, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan. So pick up these big stones at the bottom of the Jordan. You know, these stones that you wouldn't see unless the Jordan was actually stopped. From right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you, and put them down at the place where you stayed night. So Joshua called together the 12 men who had been appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up on his stone, a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So these stones were set up on purpose so that they would remember. You know, they've forgotten in the past what God did, so God gave them this reminder that they can set up these 12 stones so that every time they look at those stones, they think, oh yeah, God did do that for us. And they can tell their children, that's what God did to us, for us. And their children can tell their children, that's what God did for us. That in the middle of all this storm, in the middle of this raging river, God stopped it and made a way for us. So in here, we can kind of see that it's, biblical to set a reminder for ourselves. When God does something, we need to set a reminder for ourselves so that we remember what God has done. You know, that could be a sign in your house. That could be writing down in a journal. But it's important that we create these reminders for ourselves so that we will remember. I set a text on my phone, and it sends me this text every single day. And you can't see it, but it says, tell Sarah I love her. It's important to me. I send this reminder to myself every day. And I'm thinking to myself, especially, this past week, I need to do that with the things that God does for us, because I forget them. What has God done for you? And when you look back at what God has done for you over and over again, suddenly your trials of today don't seem so big, because you already know that your God has conquered worse in the past. This today, it's nothing that our God can't handle. He remembers. He is faithful. We forget. We're unfaithful. If we remember God in those hard times, everything will be a lot simpler. So if you're not 100% convinced that a sign or a reminder is a good way to go, let's take a look at what God did in Genesis. Now, God set up here, this is right after the flood, and God said, this is a sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. So if you're not 100% convinced that setting a reminder is a good way to go, God did it. The rainbow, we think, oh, that's a reminder for us. No, that was a reminder for God. It says, I will remember my covenant between me and you. God set himself a reminder, and a pretty cool reminder it is too. I mean, think about that there's a big thing of colorful particles, there. That's awesome. I'm not going to go into the science of it because, I would not do a good job explaining that, but it's amazing. God set that as a reminder for himself. So we should set reminders for ourselves. Because when we remember what God has done for us, all the problems that we're facing today seem a lot smaller. So that's what I want to challenge you guys to do, that every time God does something, every time God answers a prayer, we hear prayer requests every day when we come to church here. And we hear those prayer requests being fulfilled. But then that's gone. And then it's the next request and the next fulfillment. But just imagine if we kept track of every single one. Because God is a merciful God. God is a remembering God, and he remembers and he fulfills. So I want to challenge us to keep track. I want to challenge myself to keep track because I forget. I know I'm forgetful. And I'm not going to condemn you guys as forgetful, but everybody right now might be thinking, I can see where I could use that, But that's the challenge I want to give us. So as we sing this final song, I want us to remember that and to remember to not forget. All right.